The morning sun slid over the horizon, painting the ranch in pale gold as Jack stepped outside. His boots crunching against dry, earthy air was thick with the smell of hay and dust. But something was wrong. His gaze snapped to the clearing where the old water tank had stood for years, and his breath caught it was gone, stripped from its place like a tooth pulled from the land. His heart pounded with disbelief and anger as he walked to the flattened earth tire marks, carved into the dirt leading toward the road. And in that moment, he knew who had done it. Jack was not a man prone to panic. He had spent years working this ranch alone, mending fences, digging trenches, sweating beneath a merciless sun. He was used to hardships, but this was different. This was theft, deliberate and arrogant, and the name burning his head was the same one that had plagued him since the day the Homeowners Association crept into his life. Kerren. She was a queen of the HOA, a woman with sharp words, sharper heels, and a smug smile that dared anyone to challenge her. She believed the entire community belonged under her thumb, and Jack was the only one stubborn enough to push back. He remembered the last argument. As if the dust still hung in the air, she had stood at the edge of his property, clipboard in hand, declaring the tank an eyesore that brought down property values. Jack had laughed and thinking it was another empty threat. But she had leaned closer, perfume cloying, her voice dripping venom. When she said, "I will make sure it is gone, you mark my words, you cannot keep filth like this in our neighborhood," Jack had brushed her off, but the certainty in her tone had lingered. Now the certainty was carved into the earth by thick tire treads, the sound of her voice echoing in his mind. Jack's jaw clenched as he circled the bare patch where the tank had once loomed. The heat pressed down the silence heavy. Except for the call of a crow overhead, his fist tightened, and he muttered, "She really did it." The tank was not ordinary. It was old, dented, ugly by any suburban standard, but Jack had been useful, and far more than Kerren could imagine. He had never corrected her assumption that it was water storage, because the truth was worse. The truth was that the tank held sewage, raw, untreated waste collected. While his ranch plumbing was being reworked, it was a temporary system, a foul but necessary solution, and Kerren in her arrogance had stolen it, thinking she had won some kind of victory. The thought almost made him laugh, almost, but the fury was stronger, the sheer nerve of her to drag something off his land in broad daylight, emboldened by the HOA's grip on the neighborhood. She was untouchable, or at least she thought. She was. Jack's chest burned with the humiliation. Not only had she taken his property, but she had turned it into a spectacle, no doubt telling neighbors she had rescued the community from his blight. The memory of her words scraped at him, dirty farmer roughneck, bringing down our refined neighborhood. She had sneered in front of half a dozen homeowners, and they had chuckled, nervous sycophants too afraid to cross her. Jack had stood tall then, but the sting of ridicule had cut deep. Now, staring at the empty space, he felt the sting transform into something harder, sharper, not despair, but resolve he would not confront her directly. He had learned that game long ago. The HOA was a fortress of bylaws and paperwork shields she wielded with expert cruelty. No, the only way to beat her was to let her arrogance collapse under its own weight. Still, he imagined her in that moment, proud and triumphant, standing beside the tank, like a queen parading a trophy. The image was almost satisfying, because Jack knew what she did not know. He knew the rot festering inside, the metal shell of filth waiting to burst free. The flies buzzing in the heat seemed to mock him as he turned back toward his porch. He paused, glancing once more at the tracks leading away, dust settling slowly in the air. He whispered, "Let her keep it," then straightened his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he felt calm. The conflict that had begun as a theft was already reshaping into something larger, something inevitable. Kerren thought she had claimed victory, but she had stolen a curse, and Jack would be there to watch it devour her. The evening air shimmered with heat as Jack leaned against his fence, his eyes fixed on the distant hum of voices drifting from the cul-de-sac. Kerren was holding court again, her laughter sharp and theatrical, rolling across the neighborhood like a parade of victory. Jack did not need to see her to imagine the scene. She would be standing tall, hands clasped in front of her, as if she were royalty. Neighbors clustered around, nodding and smiling, while their eyes darted nervously for approval, and therein, the center gleaming under the sinking sun, would be his tank. He could almost smell it even from here, the faint sourness that seeped through the metal walls, and yet Kerren in her pride would be blind to it. She had scrubbed the surface, painted over the rust, and declared it a shining beacon of community order. Jack shook his head. The arrogance was staggering. She had stolen filth disguised as treasure, and now she displayed it like a crown. Earlier that afternoon, Jack had tested his last chance at peace. He had walked straight to her driveway, where she fussed over the tank, instructing a handyman to polish the bolt. She turned at his shadow, her eyes narrowing. Before he could speak, she smirked, saying, "Come to admire what real improvement looks like." Jack had tried his best to keep his voice steady. "You do not want this tank, Kerren. It is not what you think. Her laugh had been shrill like glass breaking. She leaned closer and hissed, "You are only jealous because I turned your trash into triumph. You should thank me." The words had burned, but they also told him all he needed to know. She would never listen. She thrived on opposition. She needed his protest to fuel her vanity. She did not want truth, she wanted power, and Spectacled Jack had walked away, fists clenched, fighting the urge to shout instead. He let her arrogance take root, knowing it would bear poison soon enough. From his porch, he studied the way neighbors avoided his eyes now. They had heard her speeches about property values and neighborhood pride. They whispered behind hands, calling him stubborn, reckless, dirty. But Jack knew the truth would surface on its own. He just needed patience, and a plan. The tank was already betraying her. He had noticed it. When the sun bore down at noon, the metal swelled faint lines of dampness. Creeping from the lower seamed dark stains, spreading like veins across the paint. Kerren had dismissed it, waving a hand, and claiming it was condensation. But Jack had caught the twitch in her expression, the quick flare of doubt. She tried to bury. That was a crack in her armor, and Jack intended to widen it. He began planting seeds of curiosity in the community, without ever mentioning her by name in a local online forum. He wrote cryptic notes about the grand new project the HOA was unveiling. He posted blurry photos of the tank gleaming under sunset with captions like, "Guess what this holds? And you will not believe what is inside." He knew Kerren monitored every post. She lived for digital applause, and she would not resist stepping into the spotlight. Sure enough, she had doubled her efforts, within days hosting gatherings bragging about her achievement. As if the tank were a monument to her reign, Jack observed quietly, camera in hand, documenting the slow betrayal of metal and heat, capturing the buzz of flies the way children wrinkled noses and mothers pulled them away. Kerren brushed off complaints with rehearsed charm, telling everyone their ranch community needed to embrace progress. Jack's lips curled into a faint smile. Each lie she told was another step into the snare. She believed the story was hers, that she had humiliated him, stripped his pride, and turned it into her jewel. But the truth was festering inside her victory, waiting for the right moment to explode. He sat late into the night, scrolling through the posts, seeing how neighbors were torn between admiration and unease. Some praised her initiative, others hinted at a strange odor near her lawn. The divide was growing exactly as Jack wanted it. The seed of doubt, planted, watered, and spreading. The climax was coming. He could feel in the restless stillness of the ranch, in the way the cicadas screamed louder than usual, in the way his own pulse quickened when he thought of her parading that tank before the HOA council. He imagined her voice dripping with false sweetness as she declared it a symbol of community order, and he imagined the silence that would follow when truth burst free. Jack leaned back into his chair, the stars unfolding above him, cool wind brushing against his face. He whispered, "Let her finish digging her grave. She thinks she has beaten me, but she stole the wrong prize." The satisfaction was not in vengeance alone. It was in knowing he did not have to raise a finger. All he needed was time. All he needed was her pride. And pride was the one thing Kerren would never let go of. The morning of the HOA meeting arrived with a heavy stillness, the kind that pressed against the chest and warned of something inevitable. Jack rose early, his boots crunching against gravel as he walked to the fence line. From there, he could see Kerren's house across the cul-de-sac. Banners fluttered on her porch, tables arranged in neat rows, a crowd beginning to gather. She had promised a grand reveal, and every curious neighbor seemed eager to watch her take another victory lap. Jack leaned against the post, his arms folded. The tank loomed behind her, freshly painted, its dented sides gleaming beneath the sun. But even from this distance, he could see the darker streaks crawling down with the edges moist with seepage. He could almost smell it, carried faintly on the wind. Though Kerren strutted about in a crisp white dress, her hair lacquered in place, her smile sharp and fixed. By noon, the crowd had swelled, folding chairs filled with homeowners murmuring in anticipation, children chasing each other at the edges, while parents shushed them, cameras already raised, phones ready to capture Kerren's moment. She thrived in their attention. Lifting her hands like conductor before an orchestra, she began her speech. She spoke of progress, of unity, of standards that uplifted their neighborhood. She gestured toward the tank, calling it a symbol of order and pride. Her words were honeyed, but Jack saw the twitch in her nose, a tiny wrinkle of disgust. She tried to hide the smell, was growing stronger, the flies thickening in lazy spirals around the base, and yet Kerren pressed on, determined to finish her performance. Jack's chest tightened, not with fear, but with anticipation. He could almost count the seconds as she stretched her speech, bragging about how she had rescued the community from filth, how she had taken trash and transformed it into treasure. Her voice rang across the crowd, clear and arrogant, until a low groan cut through the air. The tank shuddered, metal straining. Under pressure, Kerren faltered mid-sentence, eyes darting back. At the looming cylinder, the crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs, rising then with sound like thunder. The scene split. A torrent of sewage burst forth, dark and vile, cascading across the pristine lawn, splattering tables, knocking over chairs. The stench hit. Like a physical blow, neighbors gagged, children screamed, people stumbled back in horror, phones still recording as chaos unfolded. Kerren stood frozen, her white dress drenched in filth, her perfect hair sagging under the weight of sludge, her face twisted between shock and denial. Jack did not move. He watched, arms folded, as the spectacle played out. Kerren slipped, tried to wade free, but every step dragged her deeper. Neighbors shrieked their admiration, turned to outrage, as they realized what she had paraded before them was nothing more than a sewage tank. The laughter came first from a younger crowd, then spread like wildfire through the chaos. Someone shouted, "You stole a septic tank," and another cackled, "Queen of the sewage," the humiliation, with complete phones lifted higher, voices chanting, mocking the woman who once held power over them. Kerren turned wild eyes toward Jack, her lips parting as if to beg or curse, but he only tilted his head and said, "Guess you got what you wanted, Kerren." All of it, the words hung in the foul air, sinking deeper than any blow. The meeting dissolved into uproar, board members arguing over liability, homeowners furious about the biohazard, their once proud leader dripping and reeking in front of them. Kerren's empire crumbled in minutes, and Jack felt the weight of months of conflict lifting from his shoulders, replaced by cool, quiet satisfaction. By the following week, the videos had spread beyond the neighborhood, viral clips mocking HOA, Kerren drowning in her own arrogance. News outlets picked up the story. Neighbors, once loyal, turned hostile, demanding her removal. Fines rained down. Cleanup crews swarmed her property, and the HOA council stripped her of authority, unable to survive the scandal she had created. Jack stood at his porch, sipping a cold drink, watching trucks haul away the ruined tank. The air finally clear again, peace settling across his ranch. He felt no need to gloat further. Justice had already spoken louder than he ever could. Kerren retreated into silence, her window shuttered, her yard barren, her reputation destroyed. She would forever be remembered not as the ruler of the HOA, but as the woman who stole a sewage tank and unveiled it to the world. Jack chuckled softly, setting his glass down. He whispered to himself, "She wanted my water tank. So bad now. She knows you never steal from a rancher unless you are ready to deal with the bull." The cicadas sang in the trees. The ranch breathed easy once more, and Jack leaned back into his chair, content. The war was over, but the story would live on, whispered in laughter, shared in videos, replayed endlessly, a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets its own downfall. The weeks that followed carried a strange quiet across the neighborhood, but the silence was not peace. It was the aftermath of a storm, one that left Kerren stripped of her crown, and the community struggling to reconcile what they had witnessed. Jack moved through his days with steady purpose, tending to his ranch, fixing what needed fixing. But everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Neighbors who once sneered now nodded in uneasy respect. Some even muttered apologies under their breath, embarrassed they had ever stood behind Kerren's shadow. Yet Jack knew the story was not over. Not yet. Kerren had lost her public throne, but pride like hers did not wither easily. It festered like an infection, waiting for one last desperate gasp of power. He saw it in the way her curtains twitched when he passed her house, in the way her car idled at odd hours in the driveway. She was planning something, and he knew she would not leave the stage quietly. One evening, he found the proof. A flyer slipped beneath his gate announcing a special emergency meeting called by Kerren herself, though the council had formally removed her. She claimed she had evidence of corruption, proof that would expose Jack as the true villain of the community. Jack laughed softly at the absurdity, but his laughter was tempered by caution. He knew her. She would twist anything into a weapon, even her own ruin, and he could not underestimate the venom of a cornered snake. The night of the meeting, the air was thick with unease. Neighbors gathered reluctantly, whispering about what disaster she might conjure. Kerren stood at the front pale, but rigid, her once polished appearance reduced to a brittle imitation. Her voice cracked as she began accusing Jack of orchestrating the sewage disaster, deliberately setting her up. She waved papers she claimed were proof, but her hands shook too much to hold them steady. The crowd murmured, restless, some still fearful of her, some weary of her endless drama. Jack rose slowly from his chair, his voice calm. "But cutting, you want to talk about proof? Let's talk about what really happened." He held up his phone screen, glowing, as he played a video captured weeks earlier. Kerren strutting before the tank, boasting that she had claimed it as her own. The camera panned to the leaking seams of flies, circling, the sound of her laughter ringing, as she declared, "This tank is mine. Now, this will show everyone what leadership looks like." The crowd erupted, gasps and whispers filling the hall. Kerren's face drained of color. She stammered, trying to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. Neighbors who once clung to her lies now turned their backs, disgusted not just at her arrogance, but at the way she tried to bury her failure beneath more deception. For Jack, the moment was not about gloating, it was about ending the cycle. He spoke evenly, his eyes locked on hers. You stole from me, and you lied to everyone here. You wanted power so badly you forgot the responsibility that comes with it. You are not a leader, Kerren. You are a warning. His words cut deeper than the sewage ever had, leaving her trembling, exposed before the people she once commanded. The council ended the meeting swiftly, declaring her barred from further participation, her influence shattered beyond repair. Kerren stumbled from the hall, shoulders hunched, whispers chasing her into the night. And this time there was no coming back. She had been undone not by Jack's vengeance, but by her own pride broadcast for all to see. Jack stepped outside into the cool air, the stars glittering above him, his chest light for the first time in months. Neighbors approached not with fear or scorn, but with gratitude. Some clapped his shoulder, others offered quiet thanks. He nodded, accepting their words, though he needed no validation. The true victory was a return of his peace. As he walked back to his ranch, he looked once more toward Kerren's darkened house, a hollow shell, what it had once represented. He felt no malice, only a quiet finality. She had written her own ending, and he had merely given it voice. At his porch, he paused, listening to cicadas hum the ranch alive and steady as always. He lifted a glass of water to his lips, smiling at the irony of its clarity. No secrets, no poison, just a simple taste of work well earned. He whispered to himself, justice always finds its way, and when it does, it is sweeter than any revenge. The night wrapped around him, calm and infinite, and Jack leaned back, knowing the chapter was closed. The storm had passed, the ranch endured, and the tale of HOA Kerren and the stolen sewage tank would echo long after both of them were gone, a story of arrogance met with truth, a story that ended exactly as it was meant to.